You are watching Graphing Part 2, a calculator tutorial on how to use the TI-8384 graphing calculator. In this Graphing Part 2 tutorial, I'd just like to show you a couple other basics in relation to graphing equations on your calculator. In the first tutorial, we focused on setting the window and getting a good picture of your graph. I'd just like to show you a couple other features. So in that first tutorial, we were graphing the line y equals 4x minus 5. I'm going to go ahead and hit the y equals button here and graph that same equation, y equals 4x minus 5. Hit enter. And also I want to illustrate to you here how I can graph multiple equations. So in y2 I'm going to type let's say x squared minus 3. And just for fun, let me hit enter and jump down to y3, and let's type x raised to the third power. So let me go ahead and hit the graph button, and we will see all three of our graphs almost shown simultaneously there. That was pretty quick. Now you can see how the screen is, pretty cluttered and messy here. It's kind of hard to tell which graph is which. So what I'm going to do here is go in back to the y equals screen, and I'm gonna, let me see, I want to turn off graph 1. Now to not graph the equation in y1, I have two choices. I can hit the clear button and totally delete the equation. But let's suppose I want to save this equation to graph it later. I just want to turn off the graphing feature. So what I'm going to do is take the blinking cursor here, hit my left arrow, and move it on top of the equal sign. I'm going to hit the enter button, and you'll notice that it undarkens or unhighlights the equal sign. Now only y2 and y3 have darkened equal signs. So now when I hit the graph button, it will only graph those two equations. There's y2 and there's y3. Now that I have those two equations graphed, it's not so cluttered. Let me show you a couple other ideas here. So I had mentioned the trace button in the first graphing tutorial. I'm going to go a little further with the trace button here. So let's say I hit the trace button, and it gives me a blinking cursor at a particular point where x is 0, y is negative 3, and it's giving me the blinking cursor on the curve y2. Now I have the option of jumping to y3 or any other curve I'm graphing by hitting my up or down arrow. You can see when I do that, the blinking cursor jumps to the other curve, and even up here denotes y3 equals x cubed is now what I'm tracing. Let's go back down to y2, and let's trace a little on y2. Now once I'm in the tracing feature, if I just hit my right arrow, the points on the graph are moving as x gets larger. So as x goes to the right, let's say, it's showing me points on the graph. And notice how those aren't really very pretty numbers. And that was one thing I pointed out to you in the tutorial, the first tutorial, which was if I was in the zoom decimal window, it shows me really nice, pretty decimal numbers. But anyway, so once I hit the trace button, I'm on a particular graph. I can move to the right as x increases, or I can move to the left as x decreases and trace along the curve. At the point negative 1.7 roughly, I could jump down to y3 and continue graphing on that curve as x decreases, so on and so forth. Now another neat aspect of the trace feature, let me go ahead and jump back down to y2 there, is let's say I want to go to a particular point on the graph. Say I want to go where x equals 3. So once I'm in the trace feature, which I am, let me hit the trace button again. But once I've hit the trace button, I can actually punch a number, and it says x equals 3, and I hit enter and say yes, please take me there. So it tells me when x is 3, y is 6 on the curve y2. Now let's say I jump up to y3. Let me jump up to y3. Didn't really go exactly to x equals 3. So let me hit 3 again, hit enter, and there's that point. X equals 3, y is 27. Now obviously x equals 3, y equals 27 is way out of my viewing window. Okay. In fact, just to remind ourselves, if we go in our viewing window, my y max is 10. If I go back to my graph, hit trace, go to y3, and punch x equals 3. Right? Obviously, y10 is my y max. Y equals 10 is my y max. Y equals 27 is way out of that window. So anyway, if I wanted to actually see that point, then I would need to change my viewing window as we discussed in that first tutorial. Now, one of the other things I want to show you in the graphing feature, let me go back to the y equals button. One of the other things I want to show you is how you can change the type of line that's used. So instead of like moving the blinking cursor on top of the equal sign to highlight or unhighlight that equation, I can move it one more time to the left of the y, and you see that it blinks on that line. Now if I hit enter a couple times, it will cycle through the different graphing features. Right now it's just graphing a regular line. If I hit enter one time, it'll graph a thick line. So if I hit graph, now y2 will be a thicker line. So if I was trying to distinguish which graph is which, that might be one way to do that. Some of the other options there, I'm to the left of y1, and that's not where I want to be. Let me go down one. There we go. So now I'm to the left of y2. Let me hit enter again, and this feature will shade everything above the graph. So if I hit graph, it will shade everything above the graph, everything greater than. If I go back to y equals, hit enter again, that'll shade everything below the graph. This feature is the what I call the magnifying glass feature. I'll show you that in just a second. And this feature is really just kind of pointless. It graphs the equation with a circle, but doesn't really graph the equation. Check this out. This is kind of strange. So here comes the graph of the equation. So you see the circle kind of traces the equation, but doesn't leave anything behind. And then let me go back over there one more time, hit enter. I think the last one is a dotted graph. Yeah. So here's a dotted graph. Let me show you what that looks like. It just plots some points, but it doesn't connect the dots. Okay? Alright, so back to the y equals. And go back over there, and if I hit enter one more time, I'm back where I started. So I can hit enter a bunch of times to cycle through the different graphing features. One last thing that I want to illustrate to you here is that magnifying glass feature that I pointed out to you. Now over here on the left screen, we have the equation that we graphed from our first tutorial, where I had to solve the equation for y. I put an extra step in here. I put in the step where I would have divided both sides by 2. And when I simplify this equation, it gives me this result. But these two equations are really the same. This one's not simplified, this one is simplified. And let's say I might want to check myself. Maybe I want to see, what's simplified and what's not. And let me turn this equation on, and let me clear these out of here. Let's clear, go down, clear. Alright, so what I'm going to do in y2 is I'm going to type in this other equation where it's not simplified. So I'm going to type in the numerator with parentheses 8x minus 10, close the parentheses, all in the numerator, that is, divided by 2. You hit enter. Now these equations are exactly the same. They're going to really lie right on top of each other. And when I graph, there's y1, boom, there's y2. Now because they're really the same equation, the lines are lying on top of each other, and I just don't see it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into y equals, and next to y2, I'm going to hit that magnifying glass feature that I was pointing out to you just a second ago. There's the thick line. Shade above, shade below, magnifying glass. Okay, so now when I hit graph, watch what happens. Here's y1, boom, that was pretty quick, and here comes y2. And you can see that circle run along the graph as it plotted the second equation, showing me that they lie right on top of each other and obviously are equivalent and are the same graph. That finishes tutorial graphing part 2.